All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jacques Boudreau. I'm an engineer at CPRA's Lafayette Regional Office out of our Operations Division. I want to thank everybody for coming out to the fourth installment of our technical webinar series. Here briefly, we're going to hear from Stu Brown on coastal change. What I'm going to do, similar to the other webinars that we've had here this week so far, is I'm going to go through just some housekeeping items and then give a brief icebreaker introduction for all of those who are interested in more events associated with CPRA's Coastal Industry Week. So with that, I'm gonna get into it, y'all. The housekeeping items. First of all, you'll notice that this meeting is being recorded, and we're recording them with the intent to distribute the recordings of these webinars as well as PDF versions of the slides that'll be presented externally. So for anyone who's interested in that, we can definitely get that to you. That has been some of the main questions I've been asked so far. And then in the event of any technical questions associated with the webinar, what I'd like for you to do is to go ahead and put those in the chat box throughout the presentation. And I want to say we have some time afterwards to open it up for a more general Q&A, but I will be monitoring the chat box for any technical questions related to Stu's presentation, and we can do the best we can to field them throughout. And without further ado, what I'm gonna switch to now is I'm gonna show my screen and get into the icebreaker session. So we presented this last week at our board meeting. Brent Hawes, who's CPRA's Deputy Executive Director, went through some of the events associated with Coastal Day. And really, just as an introduction to the event, it all stems from a legislative event called Coastal Day at the Legislature. So this year, Coastal Day is occurring on Monday, March 25th, which is right around the corner already. And on the implementation side of CPRA, which is where I work, where Stu works, some of the other presenters you've heard from this week, the scientists, engineers, the administrators, the folks that do the actual work here, we are facilitating a handful of events, namely these two that I show highlighted here, and I want to definitely encourage folks to come out. Namely, first thing in the morning on Monday, March 25th at 8 a.m., we're going to have a business networking and matchmaking session. It's going to be right adjacent to our headquarters office in Baton Rouge, which is at the LSU Center for River Studies. Definitely want to encourage anyone and everyone to please come. Also, later on that afternoon at 3 p.m., we're going to be giving a construction project forecast for CPRA-let projects. It's essentially going to be a briefing with the industry where we're going to showcase some of our upcoming construction projects in a room full of industry professionals, consulting firm representatives, things of that nature, and foster some open discussion on our projects. I'm going to continue to thumb through here, and you can see just some more information on what to expect at some of these events. I also do want to point out, and I'm not focusing much on that, but there are lots of activities occurring at the state capitol, as you may assume, for legislative events such as this. But this here is going to give you a QR code for those of you who are interested in attending the CPRA-led construction forecast. I want to point out it's combined in person and virtual. This is going to be obviously for the virtual component. The in-person component is going to occur at the LaBelle Room over at the LaSalle building, which is where Department of Energy and Natural Resources is housed, not far from the state capitol. And to end it all off for the industry briefings, we're going to have a partner-led version of the projects that CPRA has the pleasure of being involved with some of our local partners, such as local levee districts, different coastal zone managers, different police juries, different parish-let construction contracts. So if you're interested in hearing more on that side, please do come out to that. That's on Tuesday, March 26th. The QR code is there below. And finally, what I'll do is I will get into just what we've covered so far with the technical webinar series. On Monday, we heard from Russ Joffrion on CPRA's Marsh Creation Design Guidelines. Tuesday, we heard from Todd Baker on the Chandelier Islands Restoration Project. He gave an update on the E&D progress there. Yesterday, we heard from Syed Khalil on a sediment management-oriented presentation. Today, we're obviously here to listen to Stu Brown. The title of his presentation is Illustrating Coastal Change Using High Tide Flooding and Historic Storms. And please do join us tomorrow. Same time, same webinar link. The QR code is there for the fifth and final installment of the webinar series. The title of that talk is Designing for the Birds, Considering Avian Habitat Needs in Coastal Restoration Projects. So with that, I'm going to stop my share. Stu, I'm going to have you go ahead and start sharing and everybody look out. I'm going to put some information for you in the chat box, just different events different resources you can tap into to look at our coastal events, as well as some more direction on general questions. With that, Stu, feel free to take it away.
All right. Thanks, Jack. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Stu Brown. I manage the strategic planning branch here at CPRA. We are the folks who developed the Coastal Master Plan. And I am going to be talking about the Coastal Master Plan today, but I think from a slightly different angle than many of y'all have maybe seen me do in the past. So this presentation is on some of the kind of bespoke analyses we've done that go beyond what most folks are familiar with, our projections of land change and flood risk. These analyses focus on helping people understand how the coast is going to change and illustrate not just how it's going to change, but how folks may experience that change. So for a little bit of context, the master plan is, of course, at its core, a prioritization effort. How can the state spend its money most cost effectively over the next 50 years to reduce storm surge-based flood risk and restore and maintain coastal wetlands? So to do this, we develop models to help understand how the landscape is going to change over time, to help understand how that changing landscape combined with subsidence and sea level rise impacts flooding and the exposure that we have to tropical storm and hurricane based flooding in coastal Louisiana. Then we use those models to evaluate and prioritize restoration and risk reduction projects. And so typically when I give a master plan presentation, I am presenting all that sort of thing. And if that's what you're interested in, we've got tons of materials and recorded presentations available on our website. At the URL below, we have a number of recorded presentations that I think would be helpful. But for this presentation, we want to focus more on a different goal that we have for the master plan, about how we can use the master plan to illustrate how people and communities will experience a changing coast and give them the information that can help them make decisions about how to prepare and adapt for a future in coastal Louisiana. So really the kind of bigger idea is we want to think more about the master plan, not just as a list of projects, but as a resource for citizens, communities, local governments, planners, and so on. And so I do want to quickly highlight some of the resources that we have before we get into a slightly deeper dive into some of the exploratory analysis that is mentioned in the title. The first resource is the master plan itself, the kind of main document. One thing that makes the 2023 plan different from previous versions is that about a third of the plan is dedicated to these regional sections where we're trying to put the broader plan in context of the different regions of the coast. We spent a lot of time working with regional work groups, having public meetings, really trying to understand what is important about these different regions, what makes them different from each other. We understand that the problems and solutions in the Cheniere Plain are different than the problems and solutions in the greater New Orleans area. And we want to make sure that we are reflecting that, and it's a plan that those people who were so generous to spend their time helping us a plan that they can see themselves in. So the plan itself is a great starting point as a resource. A couple other resources to point you to. The master plan data viewer is meant to be kind of our public-facing viewer where people can go in. You can type your address, you can type a location name, a lake, or something you're familiar with, and learn more about how we're projecting the landscape will change and how we're projecting flood exposure will change, and there's a lot of functionality there to explore, and you can get into some details for sure, but it is still meant to be something that folks with kind of basic familiarity with navigating the web can learn about their area and learn about the coast in general. The next resource I want to point folks to, and just looking at some of the names of attendees, I'm glad we have a bunch of engineers and contractors for this. Something that we developed and are still improving is our master plan data access portal. So while the master plan data viewer is serving up some kind of final product outputs from our modeling efforts, the master plan data access portal is meant to be geared to more of a technical audience, where we're presenting a lot of kind of the more detailed data that underpins the landscape analysis and underpins the surge and wave and risk modeling that we do. And this is geared more towards maybe it's local government or planners, or maybe it's federal partners, other state partners, contractors can take advantage of this level of information. And we are we've seen already a lot of folks in academia who've been working off of this data, folks working on EISs, and a few other examples so really trying to help folks leverage all the information that we produce from the master plan to support their work in coastal Louisiana. And then what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the presentation is our resources, our exploratory analyses. If you have not gotten into the appendices of the master plan, I don't blame you. This is where we put a lot of the technical information about the kind of processes and methods for the analysis and for the models that we use. But we also have a section that we're calling exploratory analyses, and this is where we're putting a lot of these reports that I'm going to talk broadly about on this presentation, but again, some of these kind of bespoke analyses to try to answer questions and to try to support the narrative that we put into the plan about how the coast is going to change and how folks may experience that change. So the first analysis that I'm going to talk about is our high tide flooding analysis. And so one of the, I guess, the impetus for this is just kind of a general interest in high tide flooding or sunny day flooding or nuisance flooding. We got public feedback that highlighted the concern over increasing frequency of high tide flooding events. We also kind of found that when we're talking about how the coast is going to change, people, we're usually talking about major events, a hurricane coming through, and people can be overwhelmed when we're talking about these catastrophic events and predictions. We want to try to make something that's not kind of thought of maybe as abstractly as we present it in the master plan. And so high tide flooding seemed like a good avenue to help people think about what living in coastal Louisiana may be like in the future. And then another kind of impetus for this is that there are existing products on high tide flooding. NOAA has a high tide flooding viewer. It's a great tool if you live in Galveston or Tampa or Norfolk, Virginia. But in Louisiana, it's a little bit imprecise, and some of the ways their models are resolved, they don't take into account the complex hydrology we have in Louisiana. They don't take into account a lot of levees that we have, not just the large federal levees, but a lot of the drainage levees that would impact your analysis of things like high tide flooding. So we wanted to do an analysis that better represented high tide flooding in Louisiana. So we selected a set of communities. These were meant to kind of span the entire coast. They were meant to be kind of representative communities, but they were also communities that had nearby long-term water level gauges that we could use and have some confidence in as we were projecting these sort of high tide flood events into the future. And so I probably should have led with this. When we're talking about high tide flooding, we're talking about flooding that is associated with kind of normal weather events like frontal passages combined with high astronomical tides. We're not talking about tropical storms and hurricanes. That sort of thing is captured in other analyses that we have. This is talking about that kind of, again, normal kind of high water flooding that we see in a lot of areas across the coast. We have a couple examples here of Delacroix and Golden Meadow on the right. Then our analysis kind of has two categories to it. One of them is a frequency analysis, and one of them is a network analysis, and I'll talk about those in the next two slides. But if you are interested, I'm just going to give a couple of snapshots of the analysis. This is all written up fairly extensively in Appendix H, Attachment H3. It's available on our website. So the frequency analysis is really looking at how frequently local landmarks will experience high tide flooding. And so we've been, I guess, affectionately calling these community vignettes. And we produced figures like the one you see here on the right. This example is of Dulac, selecting local landmarks that are either currently experiencing high tide flooding or expected to see high tide flooding in the near future, and defining what that elevation threshold, and as we're projecting water levels into the future, we can see how frequently those water levels meet that threshold. And so the example here, the Dulac Community Center parking lot, currently sees high tide flooding on about 17% of days. Without action in 25 years, it's projected to see high tide flooding about 95% of days. And we have these sort of vignettes for all 8 of the communities that we showed on the previous slide. The second analysis is the network analysis. And in this, we're trying to look at how does high tide flooding affect drive times to critical and essential facilities. So we're using a road network that we have to QA to make sure that it's snapped to the actual road elevations in the LiDAR. And we're using the database of critical and essential facilities, and looking at weather and how long it would take people to get to those critical facilities. On the right is an example of roadway flooding of greater than a ½ foot. The reds are in the current year. A high tide flooding event would flood those roadways. In the oranges and yellows, those are future years, year 25 and 50. And then using that information, we can make estimates of how that will affect drive times. This is in St. Tammany, looking at access to Tier 1 hospitals. The reds are no access, and we see a high tide flooding event that occurs in year 0. About 9.6% of people would have no access. That goes up to 10% at year 25, and that goes up to around 14% at year 50. This is under our lower environmental condition, and this is in a future without action condition. There are, of course, ways to mitigate these impacts, and there are projects actually specifically in this area that would help mitigate these impacts. So the Water Institute did this analysis with our folks from CPRA. So I want to acknowledge that team. And then again, the report and a lot more details are available on our website. The second exploratory analysis that I want to talk about is our what we're calling our historic storm case studies or historic storms analysis. And so the question is kind of how will future coastal change, or how will coastal change affect the impact of hurricanes in the future? And this is something we talk about all the time in the master plan, but we're typically talking about it in terms of projected flood depth exceedance probabilities, or when we're talking about damage, we're talking about things like annualized structure equivalent damage, and that's a real thing. And these are important metrics in our project prioritization process, but we certainly don't blame anybody whose eyes glaze over when they hear those metrics. And so this is an attempt to find a way that conveys what we believe these impacts of climate change, of land loss, continued sea level rise, continued subsidence actually means in a way that resonates better with some folks. I say some folks. We've found that different things work for different people, and this is just one attempt that I think we've gotten some positive feedback on, and I think has been fairly effective at helping people understand what storm impacts may look like in the future. And so what we did is we took historic storms as a reference, storms for which we had observed wind fields, and we could remodel those in ADCIRC to see how they would impact the coast today and see how they would impact the coast 50 years from now, with and without action. And so the storms that we were able to run, the storms that had data, had wind fields that we were confident in and thought we could reasonably apply this methodology to, were Rita, Ike, Isaac, Barry, and Ida. This also is nice. It gives us a good spread of impacts across the coast. And again, these are written up in a series of attachments that are also in Appendix H if you want more detail. And so the kind of thesis is that rather than talking about those things I mentioned, annualized structure equivalent damage or whatever, we could say, hey, remember Hurricane Isaac? You remember you experienced a half foot of flooding under your house. Well, if that storm that were to hit today, maybe you'd see 1.5 feet of flood. If that storm were to hit 50 years from now with continued subsidence, continued sea level rise, you might see 4 or 5 feet of flood. And so, again, it's hopefully an effective tool at conveying what we're actually projecting in terms of how storms will impact our coast. So I think a good example of this is one that we actually wrote up and included as a little storyline in the master plan itself, is Hurricane Ida. So in 50 years without action, we're projecting an additional 3 or 4 feet of storm surge near Lafitte. Around the La Rose to Golden Meadow system, we're looking at around 3 to 5 feet of additional storm surge. That level of surge would overtop the existing levee in Golden Meadow and cause really extensive flooding and damage. Again, this is a without action condition. When we ran with action, which included improvements to the La Rose to Golden Meadow levee system, we didn't see that overtopping. So just another way to kind of illustrate how these storms may affect a coast that's been degraded over another 50 years. So if we carry that analysis of storm surge through to damages, that La Rosa Golden Meadow area is kind of a obvious example. We see that overtopping. We see a huge amount of damage. We estimate that there would have been an additional $1.6 billion in flood damage in that polder had we seen those flood elevations we were projecting at the 50-year analysis. And that's just flood damage. Remember, we're just analyzing flood damage in this. Of course, as you all know, Hurricane Ida caused extensive wind damage as well. But another thing to look at on this map, and I apologize, I don't have the scale there, but the browns are increases in flood damage. But we see increases in damage without action across all the kind of populated areas, Homa, kind of Lockport area, Luling Booty, Mandeville, and Slidell from the hurricane. So again, this was an analysis that was executed by the Water Institute and Purdue University. So I want to acknowledge them, and also again point you all to the appendix where you can find more information on these analyses. So that is the end of my presentation. If there's a takeaway I really want to emphasize, it is kind of the value of the master plan as resources for communities. And so trying to get this information, whether it's the data viewer or the narratives in the plan itself, to individuals to help them think about their future in coastal Louisiana is a huge priority for us with the 2023 plan and moving forward, in addition to what is kind of the core responsibility of the master plan, which is the project selection process. So thank you all, and I will take any questions.
Appreciate it, Stu. I'm going to go ahead and put your email address into the chat box as I've been doing for these last couple webinars. And we'll keep on monitoring the chat box if there are any others. Definitely give folks a few more minutes. And just while we're waiting, I mean, I liked one of the things you said early on, and I think I saw an old LSU professor of mine, Dr. Irv Mendelson, here in attendance. You said it was early on. You said the problems that we see in the Chenier Plain out west are very different than the problems you see out in the greater New Orleans area, just to name two different ends of the spectrum. And if I recall correctly, is one of his classes. I will be very honest and say I was not the most talented plant ecologist, but now that I'm an engineer professionally, that's why I depend on plant ecologists that I work with. But one thing I did take away from his class was what he said, something along the lines of every quadrangle map you have throughout the USGS quadrangle map system, if you go across the whole coastal zone of Louisiana, they're all going to have their own little versions of constraints and project specific criteria that you're going to have to operate in. And as I've been here at CPRA, worked on a handful of projects throughout the coastal zone, on the west side of the state to the Pontchartrain Basin on the east side of the state. I really agree with that, and definitely had that as a big take home. And no, just kudos to the master plan team for, like you said, Stu, being able to express what is a really important characteristic of the master plan that definitely gets very sciencey, very technical as you burrow down into some of the technical appendices and what have you. I think you mentioned Appendix H, but expressing that in a way that can really mean something via high tide flooding. In fact, I was just in a meeting the other day here out of our Lafayette office. We are partnering with Vermilion Parish to do a shoreline protection project on the north shore of Vermilion Bay. And we were talking with some construction folks, some guys that work for a construction company that's going to take on the project. We were kind of kicking things off. And these are guys that work out in these coastal areas, as well as probably other parts of the Gulf Coast, maybe even different parts of the United States, but that also are sportsmen that hunt, that are really into duck hunting. And they kept on saying over and over again, they were hoping for good weather, that the king tides, they kept on saying king tide flooding that was devastating for some of their duck leases that they had. And so I can tell you that the expression, the way of expressing high tide flooding as sort of a proxy, if you will, proxy measurement, proxy indicator of some of the detriment that we will face here in coastal Louisiana through the master plan. I think it's a great way of doing it. And Stu, I'm not seeing any other questions, but we'll definitely give people more time. I guess while we're waiting, as I've been doing, I might flip back to Bren's slides and go through more of the events for those of y'all who came in afterwards. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. So tomorrow, everyone, please do join us for the Designing for the Birds, Considering Avian Habitat Needs in Coastal Restoration Projects webinar session. This will be our 5th and final one. It'll be the same time, the same Zoom link. There's the QR code there. And then, of course, please do join us next week for Coastal Day at the Legislature, but namely for the business networking and matchmaking event that CPRA is going to be hosting along with the Coastal Technical Assistance Center as well as Louisiana Apex Accelerator. And that'll be at 8 a.m. It'll be at the LSU Center for River Studies, which is right there adjacent to CPRA's headquarters office. Please plan to attend. There's ways you can register if you go to that link I sent earlier in the chat box. That's all there. And then definitely do plan to come out to the coastal construction project forecast that we're holding that same day. It's going to be combined in person and virtual. The QR code is there for virtual attendance. This will be where we're going to have all of our CPRA-led construction contracts, and then the partner-led sister session of it, which will occur the next day. QR code is actually right there as well. And I see a chat question here from Alex Boudreau. Alex, how you doing? How long will data as hosted via the Coastal Master Plan Data Access Portal be available? Stu, I don't know if you have an answer to that, but I feel like most of that's going to stay open. I don't want to say in perpetuity, but I think it's kind of open source.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be available in perpetuity. There may be things that get retired as we have updated information, but we're still in the building mode right now. There's a ton on there, and we still have some data sets to add. And our expectation is that those will stay up kind of in perpetuity. When there's a 2029 master plan, we'll update it with new information from that analysis. But yeah.
Okay, no, thanks for that answer, Stu. Alex, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, good deal. I know in addition to that, and I was just I was looking through our webinars from last year. Eric White and Dr. Krista Jankowski gave a really similar webinar where Eric, who's kind of our expert in the ICM, is basically the modeling platform that is used to support most of the different numerical modeling that goes into the Coastal Master Plan. He did say that we've got our open source code available for a lot of the programming behind some of that H&H modeling, maybe even some of the AdCirc modeling you mentioned earlier, Stu, too, with the storms. But yeah, just really trying our best to make things transparent here. I guess I'm seeing none, everybody, but I'll give folks a couple more minutes before we sign off. I didn't hear anyone laughing earlier when I bashed myself as a not talented plant ecologist, but then again, I guess I muted everyone. So, Dr. Mendelson, I know it's been a while, but I can refresh your memory and let you know I was not cut out for that type of work. All right, everyone. Well, I guess we're about done. Do feel free to reach out to me or Stu or the general email address at CPRA's website there, coastal@la.gov, and we'll take a look at any questions y'all may have after, and hope to see everybody else around. All right, everybody. Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, Al. Thanks, Jack.